The desert wind moaned across the wide Wyoming plains, carrying with it the scent of dust and rain. The sky was bruised with clouds, purple and gray, swirling above the McGraw Ranch like a restless spirit. Inside the old barn, a single lantern cast a trembling glow that swayed with the wind, making shadows crawl over the rough wooden beams. Luke McGraw stood near the far stall, his broad shoulders tense, his hat tilted low to hide the pain in his eyes. At his boots lay Daisy, his mare, her flank rising and falling in uneven rhythm, her dark eyes wide with fear and agony. The once proud animal, strong enough to haul cattle and race storms, now lay helpless, her leg bent at an angle that made his stomach twist. He knelt beside her, his calloused hands trembling as he touched her neck. "Easy, girl, easy now," he murmured, voice breaking. Her body quivered, and she let out a low, pained whinny that seemed to cut through him. Luke swallowed hard. The sound of an animal suffering had always been the worst kind of silence, because there were no words that could make it right. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was rolling in fast. Then he heard another sound, softer, human, a gasp from behind him. "Luke." He turned sharply, the lantern's flame flickering against the movement. There, clutching the barn post for support, was Clara Evans, the doctor's daughter from town. She had insisted on riding out with him that afternoon, saying she wanted to see what real ranch work looked like. Now, she stood pale and trembling, her riding skirt torn, blood trickling down her ankle and staining the straw beneath her boots. "Clara." Luke's eyes widened. What in God's name? She tried to take a step forward but stumbled, collapsing against the stall door. Luke caught her just in time, his arms wrapping around her shoulders. Her skin was cold, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "It's bad," she whispered, wincing. I think something's broken. Or cut deep." Her voice was weak, barely audible over the growing wind. Then, with a small, broken sob, she added, "It hurts so bad. Please, Luke, do something." Luke froze. The words hit him harder than he expected. "I beg you," she whispered again, "it hurts so bad." For a moment, he could only stare, between the dying horse and the bleeding woman. 2 lives, both depending on him. He felt the walls close in, the weight of helplessness pressing against his chest. Finally, instinct took over. He guided her down gently onto a pile of hay, his jaw tight, his hands steadying her trembling frame. "You'll be all right," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Her breathing came fast and shallow. The lantern's glow made her face look almost ghostly, streaked with dust and tears. Luke tore off his scarf and pressed it firmly against the wound on her leg. She cried out in pain, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice low, rough. "I have to stop the bleeding." Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with tears. "You shouldn't be sorry," she whispered, shivering. "I shouldn't have gone with you. I slowed you down." Luke shook his head. "Don't talk. Just breathe." Outside, the wind howled, slamming the barn door against its hinges. He glanced toward Daisy. The mare was still, breathing raggedly, her pain unbearable to watch. A choice waited in the air, heavy as the storm clouds. He poured water from a nearby bucket onto her wound, washing away the dirt and blood. Clara winced but didn't cry out again. She was strong, stronger than he'd thought. But her lips had turned pale, her pulse faint beneath his fingers. "Stay with me, Clara," he whispered, voice trembling despite himself. She met his eyes, green meeting blue, and managed a faint, pained smile. "You're not the man I thought you'd be," she murmured. "You're kinder." Luke didn't answer. His throat was too tight for words. He only pressed the cloth tighter, trying to stop what he couldn't control: time, pain, fate. A flash of lightning split the sky, lighting up the barn in an eerie blue-white glow. For a second, everything seemed frozen: the dying mare, the wounded girl, the rancher torn between them. Then the thunder cracked like a gunshot, and Daisy let out one final, heart-wrenching cry. Luke's hands stilled. He didn't need to look to know. His chest caved inward, grief and guilt flooding in like cold rain. Clara stirred weakly beside him, whispering, "Luke, what happened?" He swallowed, forcing down the ache in his throat. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said softly, eyes fixed on the lifeless horse. The lantern's light flickered once more and dimmed, the shadows swallowing the barn whole. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Luke McGraw sat in the dark, one hand clutching the scarf pressed to Clara's wound, and the other gripping the memory of what he'd just lost. He didn't cry. Men like him didn't. But as the thunder rolled over the hills and Clara's trembling slowed, a single tear slid down the edge of his rough, dirt-streaked face. The storm came in hard. Rain hammered the barn roof like angry fists, and wind howled through the gaps in the wood, carrying the smell of mud and lightning. The lantern flickered weakly, casting a trembling circle of gold over the dirt floor. Luke McGraw worked with desperate precision, his hands steady, though every nerve in his body screamed. Clara lay stretched out on the hay, her skin pale and clammy, sweat glistening on her forehead. Her breaths came shallow and uneven. The scarf he'd tied around her wound was soaked through with blood. He pressed harder, but it was no use, the flow wouldn't stop. "Hold on, Clara," he muttered, reaching for the old supply chest his father had kept in the barn. Inside were relics of hard years, bits of rope, old nails, a flask of whiskey, a dull hunting knife wrapped in oilcloth. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Clara stirred, her voice faint. "Luke." He turned to her, crouching low. "I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open. They looked glassy, unfocused. It's getting worse," she whispered. "My leg, it burns." Luke tore the scarf away and peeled back the fabric of her skirt to check the wound. His stomach dropped. The gash was deep, jagged from where her horse had thrown her into barbed wire. The flesh around it had already turned a sickly shade of red, the veins darkening beneath the skin. Infection, fast and deadly. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of realization settle in his gut. Out here, miles from town, with no doctor and no medicine, there was only one way to stop it from spreading. Clara must have seen the look in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked weakly. Luke hesitated. "You've got poison in your blood, Clara. It's spreading fast." Her eyes widened. "You mean?" He nodded grimly. "If we don't stop it now, it'll reach your heart before sunrise." The barn filled with silence, broken only by the wind rattling the doors. Clara's lips trembled. "You can't mean." "I do," he said quietly, staring down at the knife in his hands. The steel gleamed faintly in the lantern's light. "It's the only way." Her face went pale as ash. "Luke, no. You can't." He stood, pacing once, twice, the storm roaring outside like an angry beast. He couldn't look at her. He'd seen plenty of pain in his years, a man crushed under a wagon, another trampled by cattle, but this was worse. This was someone innocent. Someone who trusted him. "I can't let you die," he finally said, voice hoarse. She looked up. At him, tears mingling with the rain that had blown in through the cracks. "You'll hurt me," she whispered. "Please, don't." He knelt beside her again, his voice softer now, trembling. "Clara, listen to me. It's the only chance you've got. I'll make it fast. I swear it'll be quick." Her breath hitched. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at the ceiling as thunder cracked overhead. Then, with a faint nod, she whispered, "I trust you, Luke. Just don't let me scream." He blinked, his throat tightening. "I'll try." Luke grabbed the whiskey flask, twisted the cap off, and poured some into her mouth. She coughed, choking slightly, but managed to swallow. Then he poured the rest over the knife in the wound. The smell of alcohol filled the air. "Bite this," he said, slipping a strip of leather between her teeth. "And don't move." Her eyes squeezed shut, tears escaping down her cheeks. He waited a moment longer, then took a deep breath and pressed the knife down. The sound that followed was like nothing he'd ever heard. A muffled scream, raw, animal, heartbreakingly human. He worked quickly, his hands shaking, cutting away the blackened flesh before the infection could climb higher. The smell of iron and whiskey mixed with the rain, choking the air. When it was finally done, he dropped the knife and sat back, drenched in sweat. His chest heaved as he stared at her trembling body. Clara's face was white, her lashes wet with tears. The leather strip had fallen from her mouth, soaked through with blood and bite marks. "Clara," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's over." But she didn't answer. Her head lolled to the side, her breathing shallow, faint, but still there. He tore off his coat and wrapped it around her, then pressed his hand against her cheek. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Please." Lightning flashed again, throwing their shadows across the barn wall, a broken man and a half-conscious woman bound by pain and something deeper neither could name. Luke stayed there beside her, holding her as the storm raged on outside. He whispered the same words again and again, as much for himself as for her. "It'll be quick," he'd said. But as the night dragged on, every second felt endless, every heartbeat a reminder of what mercy costs on the frontier. Dawn crept slow and fragile across the Wyoming plains, spreading thin fingers of gold over the soaked earth. The storm had broken hours ago, but the air still smelled of wet hay and iron. Inside the barn, a thin plume of smoke rose from a dying fire. Luke McGraw sat hunched beside it, elbows resting on his knees, staring into the embers as if they held answers to sins he couldn't wash away. Clara lay a few feet away, wrapped tightly in his old coat, her bandaged leg propped up on a pile of hay. Her breathing was soft now, not the ragged gasps of pain from the night before. Luke had cleaned the wound again at first light, used every drop of whiskey he had left, and said a prayer he wasn't sure anyone was listening to. The barn was quiet except for the drip of rainwater from the rafters and the occasional groan of the wooden walls as they settled back from the storm's fury. Luke's eyes burned from exhaustion, his hands still trembling faintly. He hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her scream again, felt the resistance of her skin against the blade. He turned toward Daisy's stall. It was empty now, the straw raked clean, but the memory lingered, her last breath, her body still and heavy beneath his touch. Losing her had been hard enough. What he'd done afterward, though, that was something different. Something that carved deeper. The barn door creaked open, letting in a shaft of pale light and the smell of rain-soaked sagebrush. Sheriff Dalton stepped inside, his hat dripping, his weathered face unreadable. He was an old friend of Luke's father, a man who'd seen more than his fair share of life and death on these plains. "Morning," the sheriff said quietly. Luke didn't look up. "You shouldn't have come." "Couldn't help it," Dalton replied. "Storm hit hard last night. I came to check on you." He looked around, his eyes landing on Clara's pale form. "Heard you had company." Luke finally lifted his gaze. "She's the doctor's daughter. Got hurt yesterday when the horses spooked near the ridge." Dalton nodded slowly, stepping closer. "She alive?" "Barely," Luke said. "But she'll pull through. I did what I had to." Dalton's eyes flicked toward the blood-stained rag and the blackened knife resting on the table. He exhaled through his nose. "You did what nobody wants to do." Luke said nothing. The sheriff's words were meant to comfort, but they only echoed what he already knew, that mercy on the frontier was cruel, and kindness could look a lot like brutality. After a long pause, Dalton placed a heavy hand on Luke's shoulder. "You saved her life," he said. "Don't let that haunt you." Luke's lips twitched, almost a bitter smile. "Too late for that." Dalton nodded once, gave the girl a last look, and left without another word. The door shut softly behind him, and the barn returned to silence. A few minutes later, Clara stirred. Her eyelashes fluttered as she blinked awake, disoriented. "Luke," she whispered, voice weak but clearer than before. He turned instantly, kneeling beside her. "I'm here," he said, trying to sound calm. Her eyes filled with tears. You stayed." He gave a small nod. "You didn't think I'd leave you out here, did you?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You could've. You should've. I heard what you said last night." Luke frowned. "What did I say?" "You said, it'll be quick," she murmured, voice trembling. "I remember that. You said it like it was a promise, like you were trying to save me." He looked down, guilt tightening his chest. "I didn't know if you'd survive. I didn't want you to suffer any longer than you had to." Clara reached out, her fingers brushing against his calloused hand. "You didn't hurt me, Luke. You saved me. It was mercy, not cruelty." He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand." I do," she interrupted softly. "You gave me another day to breathe, to see the sunrise. That's something no one else could have done." For a long moment, he couldn't speak. The fire crackled low, filling the silence between them. Her words didn't erase the pain, but they dulled it, turned the sharp edges into something he could hold without bleeding. Outside, the clouds began to part. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the barn, catching the dust in the air like tiny golden sparks. Luke helped her sit up, supporting her carefully. "You should rest," he said gently. "When you're stronger, I'll take you back to town." She nodded, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "And you'll come visit?" she asked, voice barely more than a whisper. He smiled faintly. "Reckon I might." They sat there for a while, the quiet of morning wrapping around them. For the first time since the storm began, Luke felt the weight in his chest ease, not vanish but soften. Maybe some wounds weren't meant to heal completely. Maybe they just became part of who you were. As the sunlight spilled across the barn floor, Luke glanced once more toward the empty stall, Daisy's stall, and whispered under his breath, "I did my best." Then he looked at Clara, alive and breathing, and for the first time, the words didn't sound like an excuse. They sounded like truth. Outside, the prairie wind moved gently through the tall grass, no longer screaming but sighing, as if the land itself knew that, out here in the wild, survival was never clean, but sometimes, it was enough.